I stood at the edge of the rose-petal-strewn aisle, my breath puffing little clouds into the dawn-light air, and tried to anchor myself in the moment. Boston spring had borrowed winter's chill today, but the delicate blossoms taped to white pillars promised warmth. My heart pounded against my chest like it was trying to break free, and I had to swallow twice to calm the tremor in my voice. I was Reed Mercer, and today I was supposed to be marrying the woman who had become my compass. Talia Monroe, in a celebration that felt both timeless and utterly fleeting. The breeze caught the edge of my tailored black coat and tugged, as though eager to carry me forward. I let it. I had waited my entire life for this. When the string quartet struck the first notes of our processional, I straightened reflexively, feeling the weight of every eye upon me. Friends whose smiles glowed like polished pearls, relatives whose whispered congratulations buzzed at the edges of my awareness, and strangers who must have been drawn by curiosity. People I'd met only to shake their hands and nod, now watching as if I were the lead in someone else's play. The path of petals cushioned my footsteps, but I felt each crunch as though the ground beneath me might fracture. I reminded myself that this was a day of promise, not peril. A day I would replay in my mind when age curled silver into my hair and the world contracted with memory. The ceremony had been a blur, vows whispered through trembling lips, rings slipping onto fingers slick with nerves, eyes glistened with unshed tears. When Talia had called me her partner, her confidant, her equal, my chest had tightened so fiercely I feared I would pass out before the last "I do." But then we made it through, hand in hand, a new name tethered to mine. And now, as we stepped into the reception tent, even the drab white canopy seemed to pulse with possibility. The venture was no longer just a union of two people. It was a declaration that love could outshine any doubt. I paused at the threshold, watching Talia pivot beneath the fairy light strung like constellations across the ceiling. Her gown was a swirl of ivory lace, punctuated by tiny blossoms that echoed the real blooms outside. Her laughter rippled through the room before she saw me, and she turned, releasing a gentle, radiant beam that softened every crease in my worry. In that glance, I saw gratitude for the life we had built, for the challenges we had overcome, and for the world we would build together. The first course arrived with a flourish, spring pea soup garnished with a single violet petal resting like a blessing. I raised my spoon but took in the scene first. The long, rectangular tables dressed in pale linens, the centerpieces of ferns and roses, the clusters of guests leaning in to speak, voices hushed in conspiratorial joy. Someone toasted with champagne, someone else laughed too loudly. Somewhere in the background, the quartet slipped into a gentle waltz, and I realized my knees had weakened. I focused on the texture of the soup, the bright pop of sweetness on my tongue. I closed my eyes and let the flavor steady me. This was real. A hush fell over the table when my best man, Aaron, stood with his glass raised. He'd known me since childhood, had dried my tears after scraped knees and drunken heartbreaks alike, and now he looked at me with something like pride. He began to speak in a voice that wavered only slightly, recounting stories of adolescent schemes and late-night confessions. I remembered those nights, his flashlight under the covers, our whispered dreams of adventure and promise. My chest swelled as he described how I'd always been the one to pick up the pieces, at school, at home, in life's slippery tumbles. His words wrapped around me like a sturdy coat, and I unconsciously shifted closer to Talia, seeking her warmth. She caught my eye and offered a soft, encouraging smile, one that seemed to say, "We're in this together." And in that instant, I realized I was no longer walking an aisle. I was embarking on an odyssey with her, charting courses neither of us could predict. The thought made my pulse quicken with excitement rather than trepidation. Then the doors at the far end of the tent swung open, and a gust of wind chased a swirl of confetti across the polished wood floor. My father appeared, stepping into the light with hands in his pockets and a quiet dignity I had always admired. He gave me a nod that held decades of unspoken pride, forgiveness, and hope. My eyes pricked with tears, and I lifted my glass to him. He returned the gesture, a simple salutation between father and son that spoke volumes. I took a slow sip, drawing the sparkling bubbles down like a promise of resilience. The room seemed to tilt, and I nestled into the moment, marveling at how a single day could feel like an eternity of love and potential. In that soft haze of laughter and music, I felt the world narrow to the two of us. Talia's hand in mine, the future unfolding like the petals of 1,000 roses. I opened my mouth to speak, to offer a toast or a prayer of gratitude, but the words caught somewhere between my heart and my throat. Instead, I pressed Talia's hand and let a smile spread across my face, warm and unguarded. We stood there, tethered by fate and choice, in a tent filled with grace and forgiveness. I felt everything I had ever been, everything I wanted to be, converge in that single moment of winter bloom. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this was exactly where I was meant to be. The reception tent glowed with lantern light, casting the newly sprung greenery and pastel blooms in a soft, welcoming haze. Glasses clinked, laughter rippled across linen-draped tables, and the scent of roasted asparagus mingled with rosewater cake. I stood beside Talia, my bride radiant in her lace gown, and for a moment, I let myself believe that nothing could pierce this perfect bubble of celebration. Then my brother Miles cleared his throat and rose to his feet, glass of champagne in hand, his grin sharper than the blades of grass outside. Conversation hushed like waves retreating from a shore, and I turned toward him. My pulse slapped against my ribs as he held up his glass, the bubbles dancing in the prism of the lantern light. He leaned forward and lifted his voice above the murmur. "Well, everyone," he began, his tone teasing familiar to me from late-night poker games and childhood holidays alike. "I think we can all agree that Reed here has always had a very particular type." His smirk flickered over the crowd as a few nervous chuckles rippled out. I forced my lips into a courteous smile, feeling the pulse of my blood in my temples. The waitstaff froze mid-step, hands poised with trays of champagne, and the string quartet stilled, bows hovering over open strings. The silence grew pregnant with anticipation, and I realized that jokes had a way of growing teeth if left unchecked. "Rich women," Miles declared, and a burst of laughter rolled through the tent like thunder. Some guffawed, some clapped him on the back, and a few, perhaps close friends, raised their glasses in mock salute. I watched their faces, searching for a sign of empathy or restraint, but found only amusement. The laughter passed over me like a cold wave. I tasted bitterness in my mouth, mingled with the sweet air of flowers and celebration. Talia's hand squeezed mine lightly, a gesture meant to steady me, but it trembled against my palm. I clenched my jaw and blinked back the stinging heat in my eyes. Then Miles paused, as though savoring the moment, and leveled his gaze straight at me. His smirk widened into something almost malicious. "Seriously, though," he continued, voice loud enough to carry to the back row of guests, "my brother's been chasing wealth since college. He finally landed one." Champagne glasses quivered in startled hands. My heart plummeted, and somewhere the laughter ricocheted again, this time rougher, crueler. The room seemed to shrink around me, the floral garlands drooping as though burdened by the weight of the words. I forced my shoulders to relax, planning to laugh along, to play the sport, but nothing rose to meet the punchline. A tremor ran up my spine when I realized this was no jest among siblings. It was a calculated strike. I swallowed hard, feeling each gulp as though I were drinking shards of ice. The notes of a waltz began to return, tentative and offbeat, but the music felt distant, a soundtrack playing underwater. Talia's wedding dress rustled as she shifted beside me. I felt the warmth of her body, but it offered no refuge from the sting. My mouth went dry, and my fingers curled around the stem of my champagne flute until the glass bit into my palm. The elegant crystal threatened to slip, and I fought the urge to hurl it against the tent pole, to puncture this momentary spectacle with a gesture of raw anger. Then came the final blow. Over the echoing laughter, louder now, as though emboldened, rose my mother's voice. She stood, glass raised high. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. I watched her form, statuesque in a gown I had helped choose for this day. She lifted the flute as though to toast a triumph. And then she said it, clear as a bell, "Congratulations, gold digger." The words hung in the air, weighty and unforgiving. Silence cascaded through the tent, crushing the residual laughter like glass underfoot. I felt the ground vanish beneath me. The laughter still echoed in my ears, faint but persistent, like the aftermath of a slap that kept my skin burning long after the hand was gone. I stood there, holding on to my champagne glass like it might anchor me, but inside I was unraveling. My own brother, my own mother, they had turned my wedding into a stage, and I was the fool on display. My vision blurred for a moment, not from tears, but from the way shame pressed against my skull like a vice. I didn't even know where to look. My eyes were locked somewhere near the floor, where the flickering shadows of fairy lights danced across polished shoes and wilted petals. And then, her hand. A soft squeeze. Not just fingers curling into mine, but something stronger. Intentional. A signal. Talia. I glanced up, expecting to see confusion or hurt in her face, maybe even anger. But she was standing. Calm. Controlled. Radiant in a way that wasn't about the dress or the makeup or the flawless hair, but something deeper, an inner stillness that silenced the room. I felt the collective breath of the guests catch, like everyone was bracing for impact. She looked not at me, not at my mother or brother, but straight ahead. "Is that really true?" she asked. Her voice didn't crack. It wasn't the voice of someone scorned or embarrassed. It was the voice of someone gathering the truth like a bouquet of thorns carefully, but without flinching. There was a pause. A long, awkward, suffocating pause. People turned in their seats. Phones stopped mid-scroll. Someone dropped a fork. You could hear the hum of the overhead heaters and the nervous shifting of guests in their formal wear. Then Talia turned slightly toward the back of the reception tent, toward the man with the headset standing near the sound equipment. "Can we play the video now?" she asked, as if she just remembered it was time for dessert or a slideshow of childhood memories. The technician looked startled. He clearly hadn't expected to be called upon this early in the evening. But he nodded, quickly slipping behind the console, fingers moving over buttons as the room held its collective breath. Miles had sunk back into his chair, legs crossed casually, sipping his drink with the lazy smugness of a man who thought he'd already won. He thought this was still a game, that this was just Talia being dramatic or deflecting. But I knew better. Talia didn't posture. She didn't bluff. And if she said there was a video, then there was a purpose behind it. I felt the air change, like a storm was coming, but no one had noticed the first shift in the wind except her. I leaned in slightly, watching her from the side as the large white screen behind the head table lit up. The projector whirred, casting a bright beam into the dim space. A hush fell so thick it smothered the room. It started simple. Clips of me. Not the polished ones from work events or the posed engagement photos. No, these were grainy phone clips and handheld footage. Me in jeans and a hoodie at the local children's hospital, kneeling beside a boy with leukemia, holding a book and reading to him, while his mother wiped tears from her eyes. Another clip showed me outside my old high school, paint-streaked and sweaty, hauling lumber for a new library wing the district couldn't afford. A low, calm voice narrated over the footage. "This is Reed Mercer. Quiet. Unassuming. Most of you don't know that he spent 3 years volunteering every Friday at the city's pediatric ward, or that he paid for 15 scholarships anonymously for kids who couldn't afford college applications." I could feel the ripple begin, not of laughter this time, but of realization. Heads began to turn, not toward me, but toward Miles and my mother. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let the weight of the moment settle where it needed to. Next came the interview. One I had forgotten about completely. It was just me and a nonprofit director sitting in folding chairs under a leaky roof, talking about why I kept showing up. He never asked for his name on anything, the woman said. No plaque. No photo. He just said, "If it helps someone get back on their feet, I'm in." She laughed softly, then added, "Reed Mercer changed our entire neighborhood." The camera zoomed in on my face. Hair a mess, eyes tired, voice raw. They don't need saviors. They need believers. Someone to look at them and say, "I see you." That's all. The room was frozen. I could feel it. Miles' smirk had finally vanished. Janice, our mother, wasn't even blinking. Her champagne glass hovered midair, the sparkle in it gone flat. I turned to Talia, and for the first time since the ceremony, I truly saw her. Not just the bride in white, but the woman who saw through all the noise and never once doubted what she had chosen. She was still watching the screen, calm and collected, but I caught the edge of something in her eyes. Fury, yes, but also protection. Love, sharpened into armor. I realized what she had done. She had come prepared. She knew. Maybe not the specifics of what would be said or who would say it, but she had known that money had always been the soft underbelly people prodded when they didn't understand me. She had seen it coming and had built this quiet defense. Not for her, but for me. And now, the room, the very people who had laughed just minutes before, was seeing me, too. Not the caricature of a man chasing wealth. Not the gold digger. But the one who gave, quietly and consistently, without ever asking to be noticed. And the best part? I didn't have to say a word. She did that for me. As the last seconds of the video faded into darkness, the entire reception tent stood frozen. No music played. No forks clinked against plates. It was as if someone had pressed pause on the night, and for once, I didn't feel the weight of being misunderstood. I felt seen, and it hadn't come from anything I'd said. Talia stood beside me, radiant not just in her wedding dress, but in purpose. She had orchestrated all of it, planned this moment with the same meticulous care she used for her business and philanthropy. She knew, maybe not exactly how the night would unfold, but she had sensed something, anticipated it. And while I had been worrying about seating charts and boutonnieres, she had quietly built this defense, this truth-telling tribute, brick by brick, also I wouldn't have to fight for myself. The silence stretched for another beat, then another, and then murmurs. Not the kind that twist with judgment, but ones carried on breath, awe, surprise, maybe even shame from some corners of the room. Then the lights slowly brightened, and the projector powered down with a soft hum. The technician gave Talia a subtle nod before disappearing back into the shadows. Talia stepped forward again, heels clicking softly across the wooden floor as she turned back to face everyone. Her eyes moved across the sea of faces, family, friends, guests, and when she spoke, it was with the same quiet fire that had drawn me to her years ago. "So now I ask you," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "does this look like a man who married for money?" No one moved. She wasn't asking rhetorically. She waited, looked around. Her eyes landed on my brother, then my mother, then the rest of the crowd. I could see some people shift uncomfortably in their seats, the shame finally catching up to them. Others, those who truly knew us, nodded silently, some even smiling with pride. Talia glanced back at me briefly, giving me the softest look of reassurance, before turning back to the crowd. "I wanted you all to know the full story," she continued, "because today, we don't just celebrate a marriage, we honor a man who gave more than any of you ever saw. Reed didn't marry into this family for wealth. If anything, we are the lucky ones, because we get to have him in our lives." The tightness in my throat came fast. I swallowed against it, trying not to let emotion pull too far ahead of me. But her words, their weight and precision, cut through every jagged insult that had been hurled at me tonight. She didn't stop there. She turned to my mother. "And if that makes him a gold digger," she said, her tone unflinching now, "then maybe we should all be digging where he did." That landed. A few gasps slipped from the crowd. Not scandalized ones, just honest, stunned reactions. My mother visibly paled. Her hand, still holding the champagne flute, slowly lowered to her side. Her lips parted slightly, as if searching for a retort, but none came. There was nothing left to say. Miles leaned back in his chair, jaw tight, the smirk gone completely. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. Good. Let him sit with it. I wanted to say something. To thank Talia. To speak up for myself again. But something about the silence was sacred, powerful in its own way. I didn't want to break it. Not yet. So I turned to her instead, my bride, my partner, and touched her hand. She looked at me then, all the fire still burning behind her eyes, and I saw something else layered underneath, vulnerability. This wasn't just a bold display for the crowd. This was her saying, "I'm with you." Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it cost me something. And that's when the room shifted. It wasn't all at once. Just a slow unraveling of tension. A clap. One. Then another. Then a third. And then it built. A growing swell of applause that started soft and bloomed into something undeniable. People rose to their feet, some with tears in their eyes, others clapping like they had just seen something they would never forget. Talia's father, usually reserved, a man of few displays, was the first to step toward me. He didn't speak. He just took my hand and shook it, firm and full of something I hadn't felt from him before, pride. Talia's mother followed close behind and pulled me into an unexpected hug. "We always knew," she whispered. People began coming forward. Guests who had laughed earlier now looked at me with gentler expressions, more thoughtful ones. My cousin Brenda came up to me, cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry for laughing," she said. "That was wrong." And still, I waited. I waited for my mother. I waited for my brother. But neither moved. Talia and I returned to the head table as the music finally resumed, soft, elegant, and unintrusive. the kind of background hum that let people breathe again. We sat together, hands intertwined beneath the table. "You didn't have to do that," I whispered. "Yes," she replied without hesitation, "I did." I exhaled, long and deep. "Did you think I wouldn't protect you?" she asked, softer now, "just for me?" I looked at her for a long time. My answer wasn't words. It was in the way I touched her cheek, the way I kissed her hand, the way I nodded slowly. No more doubt. No more pretending I didn't care what they thought of me. She had shown them the truth. And they'd seen it, finally. The projector's glow softened as the video shifted into its next segment, and I felt the air in the tent grow heavy with anticipation. I stood beside Talia, my heart still racing from the earlier revelations, and watched as the screen came alive with images of Monroe Textile's century-old factory complex. Brick arches framed the windows, their panes dust-covered and cracked. A time-worn sign hung at a crooked angle above the main entrance, its painted letters faded nearly beyond recognition. The footage drifted over close-ups of looms standing silent in dim corridors, piles of unsold fabric gathered in corners, and workers idling at benches, heads bowed as if waiting for news that would never come. My chest tightened, not out of guilt, but out of pride that this part of my story would finally be told. The narrator's voice returned, measured and respectful. 3 years ago, Monroe Textiles teetered on the brink of collapse. Market shifts, overseas competition, and mounting debts forced the family-owned mill to lay off half its staff. But then one man stepped in, Reed Mercer. The words hung in the air like an incantation, and I felt Talia's fingers tighten around mine. As though sensing my hesitation, she gave my hand a gentle squeeze that spoke of solidarity, of shared battles fought in boardrooms and late-night strategy sessions. The screen cut to a dimly lit conference room, where I stood before a long mahogany table. The camera angle made me look taller, more confident than I had ever felt inside that suffocating space. I wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, a marker in my hand. Talia's father sat across from me, tie loosened, shoulders slumped under the weight of exhaustion and doubt. Chart after chart lay spread before us, expense ledgers, profit and loss statements, cash flow projections. The air had smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. I remembered the tremor in my own voice as I walked the family through each line item, pinpointing inefficiencies, renegotiating supplier contracts, streamlining production schedules. When the CEO's eyes had flicked from the spreadsheets back to mine, I'd seen a spark of hope ignite in those lined features. That moment was recorded in the clip, his face lighting up as numbers began to shift from red to black, balance sheets edging toward solvency. As the video rolled, I heard the soft intake of breath around me. The guests no longer sat poised for spectacle. They leaned forward, as though eager to see this ordinary man become something more. The camera panned over the factory floor transformed, looms humming smoothly, spools of vibrant fabric unfurling in precise patterns, assembly lines moving in rhythmic harmony. Workers bustled in new uniforms, smiles breaking across their faces as orders were packed for shipment. I recognized faces in the footage. Unions of hands raised in unison, ribbons being cut at a celebratory reopening, children of longtime employees peering curiously through the gates. The narrator's words soared. Over 300 jobs were saved. The community regained its heartbeat. All without public fanfare. Reed Mercer simply asked, "What does this family need? How can I help?" I felt my eyes burn as I remembered those days. Early mornings spent poring over spreadsheets at my kitchen table, evenings devoted to calls with financiers, weekends touring neighboring towns to secure new contracts. I had refused credit, insisted on anonymity, believing that the work itself mattered more than the recognition. Yet here, in this moment, Talia had brought that humble sacrifice into the light, honoring the quiet labor that had saved not only a business but countless lives connected to it. Then, just as the scene seemed to reach its crescendo, the video cut to Talia and me standing side by side on the factory balcony. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, hair pulled back, her posture radiant with pride. "He never sought my family's gratitude," she said, voice steady in the recorded interview. "He sought our trust. He believed in our potential when the rest of the world counted us out." She turned to me in the clip, eyes shining, and I remembered the warmth that had flooded me when she first said those words in private, long before this night. The crowd in the tent exhaled as one, and I felt the tension dissipate in a palpable wave of relief. The final frame showed a ribbon-cutting ceremony in front of the factory gates, with employees and community leaders gathered beneath a banner that read, Monroe Textiles, Renewed and Reborn. I saw myself handing the giant scissors to Talia, her laughter mingling with cheers as the ribbon fell away. The camera lingered on her face, framed by sunlight and celebration. Then it panned back to me. Capturing the moment, I realized that I had married not for status, but for a partner who shared my vision of purpose and service. When the screen went dark a second time, a profound silence settled over the tent. It was not the charged silence of confrontation, but the reverent hush of witnesses moved by truth. I inhaled, tasting the faint scent of roses and polished wood, and felt the heaviness in my chest soften into gratitude. Somewhere behind me, a single tablecloth rustled as forks were set down, and I heard the whisper of tears being wiped away. Talia turned to face me, her expression a blend of triumph and vulnerability. She had laid bare the work I had done in shadows, given voice to my convictions, and transformed skepticism into understanding. I felt my pulse steady, anchored by the weight of what this moment meant, not the quelling of insult, but the celebration of integrity. I raised my glass, catching the faint glow of candlelight reflected in its crystal curves. Across the room, guests rose, champagne flutes lifting like constellations of goodwill. My own family stood, Janice with tears sliding down her cheeks, Miles with a slow nod of respect that carried more weight than any toast he could have offered. I caught my mother's eye, and she offered a trembling smile, shame and pride warring in her gaze. I cleared my throat and spoke before the applause could swell too loud. "Thank you," I said, voice steady. "Not for the apology, but for seeing what matters. Tonight, we honor more than a wedding. We honor the power of belief. Belief in each other, in our capacity to lift lives, and in the promise that love, at its best, requires no currency but commitment." The applause erupted then, warm, genuine, unwavering. As Talia and I embraced, I realized that the true wealth of our union lay not in fortune, but in the shared mission that would guide us through every season of life, to build, to serve, and to love with conviction that transcends all measure. The glow of the projector faded, leaving the reception tent awash in soft lamplight and the lingering echoes of applause. I felt Talia's hand slip into mine beneath the table, her fingers interlocking with mine in a gentle affirmation. As the quartet resumed playing a slow, lilting melody, I took a deep breath, letting the warmth of her presence ground me in the moment. Tonight had tested the strength of every bond in this gathering, but in the hushed aftermath, I realized that our love, rooted in respect and mutual admiration, was the one connection that no insult could shatter. The memory of our first nights together rose unbidden in my mind. I had met her at a fundraising gala for the local arts center, where she'd been the keynote speaker. I was there as a volunteer, shuttling glasses of water and adjusting microphones in the wings. She stepped off the dais with the casual confidence of someone who owned her purpose. Our eyes met across the room, hers thoughtful, curious, mine full of admiration. I remember the way she asked me my name, not because it was part of a scripted introduction, but because she genuinely wanted to know. In that moment, I realized that respect was more than a courtesy. It was a currency that built trust and forged connections far deeper than any fleeting attraction. I had walked her to her car that night, offering my arm as though it were a sacred pledge. Under the street lamp's glow, she smiled and told me she appreciated honesty. I nodded, surprised by how earnest her words sounded. "I don't do facades," she'd said, her voice warm with sincerity. "If you want to know me, you know the real me." From that point on, every conversation we shared peeled back another layer: her childhood dreams of entrepreneurship, my quiet guilt at my own successes, the challenges we each faced when the world measured value in dollars rather than deeds. We found in each other a refuge of authenticity, and respect blossomed from that shared vulnerability. I looked across the tent, where guests had begun to settle back into their seats, faces softened by understanding and perhaps a hint of remorse for their earlier laughter. My mother sat with slightly hunched shoulders, as though she were carrying the weight of her misjudgment. Miles lingered at his table, arms folded, eyes fixed on the head table, as though he were trying to decipher how he had been so wrong. I knew they would come around. Love and loyalty often require evidence, and tonight Talia had provided it in abundance. Beside me, Talia's head tilted, and she whispered, "Thank you for trusting me." Her voice was gentle, but beneath it lay the strength of our partnership. I squeezed her hand, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I always will," I murmured. The words were a promise, a pledge that I would stand by her just as fiercely as she had stood by me. I rose then, the room's attention shifting again. My legs felt steady, bolstered by the unwavering belief behind my eyes. I lifted my glass. "To Talia," I said, voice clear and resonant, "who taught me that respect is the foundation of love, and that true partnership is built on seeing and valuing each other's strengths." A hush fell, and then gentle clapping rippled through the tent. I met Talia's gaze, and the world felt incandescent. I lowered my glass and settled beside her as a waitstaff cleared crumbs from plates and brought out the next course, a delicate roulade of salmon with spring vegetables. The first forkful burned away the last tinges of tension in my mind. I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the flavor and the victory of this night's revelations. Talia leaned in, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "Remember when we pitched the outreach program? You listened to every critique before making a suggestion. You never steamrolled anyone's ideas, you build on them." I nodded, recalling the brainstorming sessions in her family's boardroom, her incisive questions, my tactical plans, our hours spent crafting proposals that balanced creativity with practical budgets. I had felt electric energy in those meetings, energized by the synergy of our minds. That was the essence of our love. Not the grand gestures, but the steady, respectful collaboration that transformed ideas into reality. Across the tent, I saw a small group of family friends huddled together, whispering and smiling. One of them raised a glass in my direction, and I returned the gesture. It felt good to be seen not as a caricature of ambition, but as a man guided by integrity. My gaze found my mother, and I caught her eye. This time, her look said something new, pride mingled with apology. She extended her hand, and I rose again. When she reached out, I brought her into a brief embrace. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, voice thick. I felt her trembling against me, a mother's gratitude for her son's resilience. I returned to my seat, heart swelled by the reconciliation. Talia met my eye across the table, and I nodded. No words were needed. We had endured insult and skepticism, and emerged stronger, taught anew that love and respect are not mutually exclusive. They are inseparable. The music shifted into a brighter tune, and guests began to gather on the dance floor. I offered my hand to Talia, who rose gracefully. We moved into the center of the floor, the first slow steps of our marital dance. Around us, guests joined in, forming circles that pulsed with laughter and clapping. I felt Talia's warmth against me, her head resting almost imperceptibly against my shoulder. In that quiet closeness, I recalled the conversation we'd had over coffee months ago, when she had asked me what I valued most. Without hesitation, I had said, trust, honesty, the courage to stand by what's right. She had smiled and whispered, "Then you'll always know where I stand." As we swayed beneath the soft glow of strung lights, I realized that tonight had not been about proving myself to the world. It had been about affirming the bond between two people who saw each other fully. Every hurtful joke, every cutting word had been an opportunity for us to demonstrate the depth of our commitment. And now, as guests cheered from the sidelines and the gentle rush of music carried us forward, I felt a quiet certainty. Our love would endure because it was founded on respect, compassion, and the unwavering belief in each other's worth. I whispered into her hair, "I love you." She lifted her head, eyes bright with unshed tears and unwavering devotion. "And I love you," she replied, "more than you'll ever know." Under the soft lantern light, surrounded by those who had doubted us only hours before, I understood that this dance, this moment, was the purest expression of our love. It had grown from respect, nurtured by shared purpose, and would carry us forward into every season of life, unbroken and unafraid. The glow of the projector faded entirely, leaving the tent bathed in the soft, golden glow of lanterns. The final words of Talia's recorded interview still echoed in the silence, lingering like the last note of a piano sonata. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Forks suspended inches from plates, conversations halted mid-whisper, even the quartet's bows poised above strings, as though time itself hesitated. In that hush, I felt the full weight of what had transpired, the humiliation, the rebuttal, the truth laid bare. And I realized that tonight's victory would be measured not in words, but in the collective shift of belief among everyone present. Talia stepped forward, heels clicking softly against the wooden floor, and exhaled a breath I hadn't noticed she was holding. Her silhouette rested against a swirl of fairy lights, her profile calm, resolute. I could see the subtle tremor in her shoulders, the steadiness of her chin, and I understood that she was staking her own pride on this moment. She turned, sweeping her gaze across the tables of guests, friends and relatives, colleagues and curious strangers, and addressed them with a quiet power that made each syllable ring. "So now I ask you," she began, voice steady though tinted with emotion, "does this look like a man who married for money?" Her question hung in the air, weighty and penetrating. I watched as heads instinctively turned toward me. Some faces softening in dawning comprehension, others knitting brows in embarrassment for having misjudged me. Silence reigned, but it was no longer the oppressive quiet of shame. It felt like a sacred pause before truth. In that space, I felt something shift beneath my feet, an alignment of convictions, a collective exhale of relief that the story at last matched reality. Talia let the moment stretch, giving people time to reflect. Then she leaned in slightly, as if confiding in all of us at once. "I wanted everyone here to know the full story," she continued. "Because today, we don't just celebrate a marriage. We honor a man who gave more than anyone here ever saw." Her eyes found mine for an instant. In their depths, I saw gratitude and pride interwoven, a fierce protectiveness that made my chest ache. She turned deliberately toward my mother, whose elegant lavender gown now seemed too fragile for the vulnerability etched on her face. "And if that makes him a gold digger," Talia said, her voice firm yet compassionate, "then maybe we should all be digging where he did." The room exhaled. It was as though a spell had been broken. Whispers rippled through the guests, not of accusation but of realization. My mother's glass slipped from her trembling fingers, sending a soft tinkle as it landed on the tablecloth. Miles rose to his feet, slowly, jaw tight, the defiance drained from his posture. He looked at me, really looked, for the first time tonight, not as the brother who had mocked him, but as a man of conviction and compassion. Mothers and fathers, friends and coworkers, all turned their attention from spectacle to substance, their expressions unfolding from skepticism to respect. I felt a flood of emotion rise, a mixture of relief, pride, and awe at the woman standing beside me. My legs, which had felt heavy with dread only moments before, now buoyed me with a newfound courage. I stepped forward to join Talia at the center of the tent, the gentle applause of a few allies building into a quiet chorus of support. I raised my hand, palm open, in a gesture that invited solidarity rather than protest. "My love," I said, my voice warm but determined, "you have spoken for me in ways I never could have, and for that I am grateful beyond words." I turned to the crowd. "Tonight, you have seen more than a wedding. You have witnessed the power of belief, the strength of service, and the depth of partnership." I paused, letting those words settle. If respect and compassion are measures of true wealth, then I stand here the richest man alive. That declaration was met with a swell of genuine applause, soft at first, then rising to a roar that filled every corner of the tent. Guests rose from their seats, some wiping tears from their eyes, others smiling with the relief of having their misconceptions overturned. My mother crossed the distance between us and laid her hand on my shoulder, her eyes glistening with tears of apology and pride. "Reed," she whispered, voice thick, "I'm so proud of you." In her embrace, I felt the healing of years of misunderstanding, the restoration of a bond one had feared broken beyond repair. Miles lingered at the edge, and I caught his eye. He nodded once, curtly, but it was enough. In that single gesture, he acknowledged his misstep and accepted the truth Talia had revealed. We clasped forearms, a gesture reserved for trust, and I sensed the ice between us melt. The warmth of family, of community, returned to the tent, more profound for having been tested. As the quartet struck up a soft waltz, Talia and I moved to the dance floor for the first time since the ceremony. Hands entwined, we swayed gently to the melody, our hearts synchronized in the promise of partnership. Around us, guests joined in, couples forming circles of celebration that pulsed with joy and newfound understanding. I felt the lingering sting of earlier insults fade, replaced by a deep appreciation for the journey we had taken together, through doubt to revelation, from humiliation to vindication. When the music softened to its final notes, Talia rested her head against my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me, for believing in us." I kissed her temple, savoring the warmth of her presence, and knew that this was more than a wedding dance. It was the turning point of our lives. A testament that love, when forged in respect and illuminated by truth, could outshine every insult and eclipse every doubt. In that moment, surrounded by those who had once laughed at me, I understood that our union had become a beacon, guiding hearts toward empathy, uplifting souls with shared purpose, and redefining wealth as the richness of character and the depth of commitment. And as we stood there, my bride's arms clasped around me, I knew without question that this was only the beginning of our greatest adventure. When the applause finally subsided, the quartet shifted into a soft interlude, notes that drifted like dappled sunlight before a turn to the next waltz. I stepped back from the center of the tent, my heart still humming with the energy of vindication, but my mind already racing forward. Tonight's revelations had altered the course of relationships and perceptions, but the real work of my marriage to Talia, would begin now. I clutched the microphone, feeling its cool weight, and guided my gaze across the gathering of faces transformed by truth. Taking a slow breath, I began. "If I may have a moment," I said, voice steady though rich with emotion. The guests turned in unison, leaning forward as though seeking the next chapter in a story they had only just begun to understand. Tonight, my beautiful wife reminded us that love is more than a promise, it's a practice. She reminded me that our union is rooted not in ceremony alone, but in the chapters we author together each day. My words reflected back the promise I had made to her, the promise I was now renewing before everyone who had gathered here. I paused, glancing at Talia, whose warm smile radiated pride. She reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. I lifted my gaze to my mother, whose eyes glistened with remorse and pride entwined. Then I turned to my brother. Miles met my look and inclined his head slightly, an unspoken sign that, despite earlier rancor, he remained my family. Each of these faces represented a thread in the tapestry of my life, and tonight we had woven a stronger bond. "I've worked since I was 14, I continued, my voice growing more confident with each word. I've sweated through construction sites and business plans. I've balanced budgets and built community programs, and I've given in ways that often went unnoticed. But I stand here knowing that the greatest gift anyone can give is to be seen for who they truly are." I felt heat rise to my cheeks as I acknowledged my vulnerabilities aloud. An act of transparency that mirrored the honesty Talia had shown me. I cleared my throat and exhaled slowly. "To my brother Miles, thank you for reminding me that family knows our faults as well as our strengths. To my mother, Janice, thank you for the love that brought me to this day, even if it came with conditional approval. To everyone here, thank you for witnessing not just our ceremony, but our character." A gentle murmur of applause rippled through the tent again. Softer this time, filled with warmth instead of surprise. Turning back to Talia, I cradled her hand in both of mine. The lantern light danced across the diamonds at our fingertips, and I recalled every curve of her face, every whispered conversation in rain-soaked alleyways, every shared laugh that had bound our hearts. "But most of all," I said, my voice thick with resolve, "I thank you, Talia Monroe, for seeing me. For believing in me when I doubted myself, for championing the parts of me that shine brightest, and for standing by me when the world mocked what it did not understand." My words flowed honestly, unadorned by speechwriter's flourish, because no script could capture the depth of our bond. The hush deepened as guests absorbed the sincerity between us. I felt a rush of gratitude for this moment of mutual recognition, the public affirmation that our love was more than vows exchanged. It was daily acts of trust, compassion, and unwavering support. In that silence, I felt Talia's breath against my hand, a rhythmic reminder of the promises we had yet to fulfill. I took a small step forward, turning so that my voice reached even the tent's far corners. "Starting today," I said, "Talia and I embark on a new chapter, not one defined by labels or preconceptions, but by shared purpose. In the coming months, we will launch the Mercer Monroe Initiative, a foundation dedicated to empowering young entrepreneurs and uplifting women-led ventures in our community. It is a testament to our commitment, not just to each other, but to the values that have shaped us." Faces brightened as the news sank in. Among the guests, I spotted colleagues nodding appreciatively, friends leaning in to discuss details, and even Miles offering an impressed smile. My mother dabbed at her eyes and whispered something to a neighbor, perhaps a promise of her own to support this endeavor. The air buzzed with anticipation, as though the tent itself recognized that our story had moved from revelation to action. I swallowed hard to steady the fluttering in my chest. This foundation is our way of ensuring that the opportunities one was blessed to have and the opportunities Talia has created in her family business are available to others. Because wealth is not measured in bank balances, but in the lives we touch and the futures we build. A warm applause rose once more, this time mingled with genuine excitement. I felt the weight of leadership settle around my shoulders, not the burden of expectation, but the energizing promise of purpose. Talia's hand in mine pulsed with shared determination, and I realized that the foundations of our marriage were more solid than any building I had ever constructed. I concluded, "Thank you for your belief, your trust, and your presence here tonight. Let this be the moment where judgments fell, and where compassion and understanding took their rightful place. To love, to service, and to the many chapters we have yet to write." Raising our glasses together, we toasted to the future, unbound by past misconceptions and fueled by shared conviction. The tent erupted in cheers and clinking crystal, a symphony of support that filled every corner. As Talia and I shared that first triumphant smile of the evening, I felt the world tilt once more, not toward uncertainty, but toward the promise of the life we would build together, hand in hand, heart to heart. The sound of applause washed over me like a healing balm, each clap a gentle reminder that the wounds from tonight's earlier insults were beginning to close. I stood at the head of the tent, still holding Talia's hand, feeling the warmth of her presence steady my trembling pulse. Around us, guests rose from their seats, friends, family, and even those who had laughed at me only hours ago, standing in unison to honor the truth revealed. I watched as Talia's father strode forward, his usual reserve replaced by genuine pride. His handshake was firm, his grip conveying more respect than any boastful toast ever could. I met his gaze and nodded, sharing an unspoken understanding that this night had forged a bond deeper than mere marriage vows. Her mother followed, tears glistening on her cheeks, and enveloped me in an embrace so wholehearted that I felt the kiss of reconciliation. The scent of her perfume, a soft blend of jasmine and sandalwood, brought back memories of childhood holidays and family gatherings, before whispers of wealth and status had clouded our relationships. I closed my eyes against the sting of emotion, letting her forgiveness settle over me like a cherished gift. As she pulled back, I caught a glimpse of her smile, tender and relieved, and I knew that my efforts, both public and private, had reached her heart. I glanced toward my own mother. Janice sat rigid in her chair, her hands clasped in her lap as though bracing herself against the tremor in her voice. Slowly, she rose, the lavender fabric of her gown whispering against the tent floor. Each faltering step toward me was an act of courage, an admission of regret made visible. The chatter in the tent hushed to a respectful murmur as she approached. My breath caught when she reached me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, her lips trembling with the weight of words she had once wielded so carelessly. I'm sorry," she whispered, voice thick with remorse. "I was wrong." Her apology echoed in the stillness between us. In that moment, I saw not the mother who had labeled me a gold digger, but the woman who had loved me fiercely since the day I was born. I placed a gentle hand on her arm, feeling the softness of her skin and the vulnerability behind her apology. I offered her a nod, small, deliberate, signifying forgiveness rather than revenge. My voice caught as I replied, "Thank you." It was all I had to say. No recrimination, no resentment, just a simple acknowledgement that our bond could heal, that love could triumph over misunderstanding. Miles lingered at the edge of the circle, arms folded and jaw tense. His face was flushed, the color of regret creeping into his cheeks. He looked at me, then at Talia, then back again, as though seeking the right words. But none came. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, a silent concession that perhaps he had underestimated the man standing beside his sister. I met his gaze and offered a small, almost imperceptible smile, a gesture of reconciliation extended to a brother who had doubted me. He stepped forward, lifting his hand in a tentative wave, and though he didn't speak, his eyes conveyed both apology and renewed respect. Around us, guests began to murmur, sharing glances of understanding and lifting their glasses once more, not in deference to status or wealth, but in celebration of character and conviction. The quartet took up a gentle melody, the notes drifting through the tent like whispered promises of hope. I looked at Talia, her eyes shining, and felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had drawn me to her from the start. She squeezed my hand, her smile conveying pride in my response and in the healing we had catalyzed together. I drew in a steadying breath and raised my glass. "To forgiveness," I said, voice resonant and clear, to understanding, and to the love that guides us through our darkest moments into the light. My words settled over the crowd, met with warm applause that sounded like a chorus of hearts mending. I lowered my glass and turned to Talia, drawing her close. In the gentle sway of our embrace, I felt the quiet triumph of truth healing old wounds and forging new beginnings. As we shared that moment, wife and husband united not only by vows but by the trials we had overcome, I realized that tonight's true victory lay in the power of honesty and compassion. The tent, once a stage for ridicule, had transformed into a sanctuary of solidarity. And though the night would continue with dancing and celebration, I carried with me the profound certainty that forgiveness and love would remain the guiding stars of our journey together. In the hush that followed our forgiveness and reconciliation, the reception tent felt transformed, no longer a stage for insult and defense, but a sanctuary where truth had reclaimed its rightful place. The quartet began a lively tune, ushering guests back into celebration, but I found myself lingering by the head table, Talia's hand in mine, gazing out at the sea of smiling faces. Our wedding had become more than a ceremony. It had been a crucible in which our love and character were tested, refined, and ultimately strengthened. Now, with the final chapter of this evening's drama unfolding around us, I felt a deep sense of peace settle into my bones. I caught sight of the catering staff wheeling in our cake, a towering confection of vanilla tears and buttercream petals, and let myself be pulled forward by the current of well-wishers. Each handshake and embrace was accompanied by words of genuine admiration. What a story. You both were magnificent. I'll never forget tonight. With every expression of support, I felt the lingering sting of earlier barbs fade further, replaced by a quiet joy that radiated from my core. I squeezed Talia's hand and smiled, marveling at how she had orchestrated this night not for spectacle, but for truth. We approached the cake table together, joined by our closest friends and family. The cake cutter was handed to me, and I paused, running my thumb over the cool metal. In that moment, I reflected on the lessons of this day, that judgments based on surface illusions could be misguided, that love rooted in mutual respect could withstand the most corrosive slights, and that the wealth worth celebrating was not counted in currency, but in character, compassion, and the impact one had on others. I looked at Talia, laughter dancing in her eyes, and felt a swell of gratitude for her vision, her courage, and her unwavering belief in me. I lifted the knife together with her, pressing it into the top tier of cake, our hands steady and synchronized. The guests gathered close, phones raised to capture the moment, but their eyes held reverence rather than the earlier curiosity. As we lifted the first slice, I caught my mother's eye across the table. A look of pride glimmered there, untainted by doubt. She clapped softly, and my heart warmed at the sight of her genuine approval. After the cake was served, we took to the dance floor once more, this time joined by our parents for the traditional family dances. My mother and I moved to the gentle strains of a waltz, her steps a bit stiff at first, but gradually growing more relaxed as we found our rhythm. We talked in hushed tones, her apology woven into gratitude, my assurance threaded with love. A moment ago, I had feared she might never understand me. Now, I sensed that this dance was the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship, one built on mutual respect and open hearts. Meanwhile, Talia danced with her father, their laughter floating above the music. I watched them swirl beneath the lantern light, his arm around her waist, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. They moved with an ease born of years of partnership, and I reflected on the parallel journeys in both our families, how traditions and expectations could bind us, but also how compassion and understanding could liberate us. As the music shifted to an upbeat waltz, guests formed a circle around us. My brother, Miles, stepped forward and took my hand, looping his arm through mine. We moved together, a practice turn and dip marking our unspoken reconciliation. His grip was firm, his eyes sincere, and in that simple act of shared dance, we rebuilt our bond as brothers. I felt the last vestiges of resentment dissipate, replaced by a warm camaraderie and respect for the journey we had just navigated together. When the song ended, Talia and I took center stage, arms around each other's waists, and faced our family and friends. The chatter subsided to a gentle hum, punctuated by smiles and soft nods. I took a breath and addressed the crowd, wanting my closing words to honor every emotion we had experienced tonight. Thank you all, I began, voice carrying through the tent with calm conviction, for witnessing not only our marriage but our truth. Tonight, we have seen how love and respect can triumph over doubt and misunderstanding. We've seen that the greatest wealth is not found in possessions or status, but in the lives we touch, in the bonds we strengthen, and in the courage to stand by one another. A hush fell, and I let the weight of those words settle. Then Talia raised her hand, linking her fingers with mine as we shared a tender smile. She spoke softly, but the clarity of her voice reached every corner of the tent. Reed and I are committed not only to each other, but to a cause greater than ourselves, serving our community and uplifting those whose potential has been overlooked. In the days ahead, we will launch the Mercer Monroe Initiative, our foundation dedicated to supporting young entrepreneurs and women-led businesses. We invite you all to join us in this effort, so that together we can build a legacy of opportunity, compassion, and shared prosperity. The applause that followed was immediate and heartfelt. Guests rose to their feet once more, glasses raised in unison. Among them, I saw neighbors, colleagues, old friends, and new ones, each recognizing that tonight's narrative had shifted from personal celebration to collective purpose. In their cheers, I heard a promise to stand with us, to carry forward the lessons of humility, empathy, and service. As the last notes of the song faded, the quartet eased into a lively jig. Talia and I led the procession of dancers, weaving through circles of laughter and clapping hands. The tent pulsed with joy, the air alive with shared energy. I caught sight of my mother, Talia, and Miles, all dancing together as if the earlier walls of misunderstanding had never existed. In that moment, I experienced a profound sense of gratitude for the resilience of relationships, for the power of truth, and for the unwavering support that had carried us through every trial. Later, as guests began to depart under the star-speckled sky, I stood at the tent entrance with Talia, bidding our loved ones farewell. The cool night air carried the promise of spring blooms and fresh beginnings. One by one, guests hugged us, whispered blessings, and offered to stand by our foundation's mission. Each embrace felt like an affirmation of the journey we had undertaken together and the work that lay ahead. When the last car pulled away, leaving only the soft glow of lanterns and the echo of laughter behind, Talia and I lingered in the empty tent. We stood hand in hand, gazing at the remnants of celebration, scattered petals, half-empty glasses, and the lone cello bow resting on the stage. I wrapped my arm around her waist and drew her close, breathing in the sweet scent of rosewater cake still lingering in the air. I couldn't have dreamed of a more perfect ending to this night, I whispered, voice thick with emotion. She tilted her head, resting her cheek against mine. It's not the end, she said softly, but the beginning of everything we've imagined. I pulled her into a slow dance, our footsteps echoing faintly on the wooden floor. Outside, dawn's first light crept over the horizon, painting the sky in pastel hues. In that quiet dawn, I felt the full weight of our journey. How far we had come, how deeply we had learned to stand for one another, and how boundless our future seemed. As we swayed together in the hushed glow, I understood that the real celebration was not confined to tonight's events. It was the ongoing promise to live with integrity, to build wealth measured in kindness and impact, and to honor the truth of who we were, both individually and together. With that conviction, I pressed my lips to her forehead and murmured, "To every chapter we've written, and every chapter yet to come." And underneath that tent, now softly illuminated by the approaching sunrise, we danced into our tomorrow, two hearts entwined, carrying the wealth of shared purpose, the richness of renewed family bonds, and the unshakable knowledge that love, when grounded in respect and illuminated by truth, could create a legacy far greater than any ceremony.